Welcome to another session in decisions training. In today's session, we'll be looking into how do we manage files on V8. So today's session is all about file management on V8. So towards this end of session, we would be able to cover the aspects such as how do we store files in decisions, what is a file data, and what is file references, and the key difference between file data and file reference. And the most important thing is how do we change file data to file reference. So in between these slides, I'll be navigating back to the studio and taking you through on how these things can be achieved on the Designer Studio as well. So let's quickly jump into our today's topic, that is file management. And I would like to give you a quick overview of file management before we jump into understanding what are the different ways of storing a file data. So files can be handled as a data that can be handled by a flow, a reference to, or from a local file system, or to store the file as an object within decisions. As a way to increase productivity and handling, the files exist in decisions as file data or file references and file references entity. So file data is something which is of a manual process. So when we drag and drop elements into decisions, it's basically asks us whether to import it as a file, as a decisions file or as a document. So any projects that we import into decisions, we basically do it as an import. So documents which needs to be stored on decisions can be directly dragged and dropped and added as a document. So while we add this gives us the flexibility to store it on decisions and make it available on the database of decisions. So let me just switch back to the studio, and here we are in our Designer Studio. So let me just import a file. So I'm just dragging a file right into our Designer Studio. So let me just grab the file, drag it back over here, and as I'm dropping, it would now ask us on what type of document, how do we like to import this. So let's add it as a document. So as soon as we add this as a document, the document is available right over here, and it would be available in the database and you can find this on the database structure of decisions. So you can go back into dbo.documents and you can find this particular document. This is one way on how we handle things manually. So this is the first thing that I wanted to cover. And the second thing, or the second way on how we handle things manually, is file data. It is a kind of automated as well. So file data is nothing but it actually is a data type used for a file handling and is stored as a byte array within a flow. This data is handled as flow data and increases the overall size of the flow's data. By using a create data step or by defining inputs or output data as a file data, users are able to utilize files within their workflows. So the file data is a data type, as mentioned earlier. The data type stores the information such as ID, file name, length, as well as file type. So these are the basic information that needs to be fed into the file data while we are trying to store it in decisions. So let's jump back into the studio and let me just create a flow where we are trying to handle the PDF documents or handle files. As soon as we click on create, this would take us right into the flow designer. As you see, we can add the step that we intend to add in our flow designer onto the white canvas right over here. So let's add a create data step as mentioned earlier. And when we do that, we have the ability to select the data type that we intend to pass in. So as we are referring to files, let's pass in or create a data type related to file data. and mention this as file upload. And over here, we have the ability to select the data type from the favorites, or we can search in the data type that we are looking for. Since the file data is available right over here, let's select this and get out of this one. And once this is done, we would be able to upload the data that we intend to pass in. So as you see, this is actually taking in a constant value where we can drag and drop the files right over here, or we can also keep it as dynamic by selecting the option select from flow. So with this, we can pass in all the files that are available throughout the flow, and the information or the data that we upload over here is available across the flow. This is one way. We can also pass in information by clicking on build data. So as mentioned earlier, the file upload asks for contents as well as file name and ID. So the contents, as you see, is a list of bytes. So we can pass this information. We can define the file name, ID as well. So the output of a file data is file data. As you see, the selected data type itself is the output of this data. So this is one way on how we create a file data. Another important thing is, how do we display this information? So let's say we want to, we now have the entire information or the file in our flow. Now we want to display this in a form to an end user. So let's go ahead and create a form. So let's create a new and create a form that says that view document. And as soon as we click on create, this would take us into the form designer. Let's add some call to action steps like a button, which is a close. And over here, let's add other components like a label and mention this as view document. And we would also like to see the document that we are passing in. So let's enter a document viewer. And here, let's keep this as full grid. And let's keep this over here as well. And let's save this. And as you see, now we can select what type of file we are trying to pass in, whether it is a document or file data or file reference. Document, when we say that we have selected a document, we have to build the contents. And file data is simply we can pass in the create data step that we have just used and the file data coming out of that particular step. So let's keep this as a file data. We also have the ability to keep it as a static as well. And let's keep it as file upload. Let's save this and now connect the close path to the end step. So as you see, the data gets automatically mapped. And now here in this case, let's keep it as a constant. And over here, I would like to choose a file. So I have the ability to drag and drop the elements from my inbox or from the file studio. So I'll be just now dragging and dropping the files right over here. And as you see, I can do that, or I can also select it from the by clicking on the option select. So let's debug this and see how the file data will be passed on into our form. As you see, we have all the information that we have just passed in. So this is a catch exception or a exception handling document that I have passed in. So you can see the create data input and output details. So we are passing in, this is the file name, this is the ID, and what is the length of the document, and the output is also going to be a file upload, which would have the ID, file name, and length. Speaking on the inputs of the form, you can notice that this is actually taking in the same information of a file upload. So this is how we can manage or upload information to manage the files that we are willing to store on decisions. This is a manual process like adding a document and a file data. So there is another way where we can store information via automated. That is with the help of document services. So if we just get into our steps catalog, and if we navigate into integration under internal services, there is a service called document service. And let us just go into document services. Here we have, and this is what we are referring to. So under document services, we have all the steps like adding document, getting a file, getting all the documents, getting with respect to specific ID, or loading a file, or even updating a document with certain information. So the document service gives us the flexibility to add the documents, load the documents, as well as do any kind of other step related to documents. So when we are speaking about document services, the first things that comes to our mind is file references. File references are used to increase the efficiency and reduce the amount of data consumed by the flow engine with larger files. As you see, the file data step that we have used previously is available throughout the flow as a complete document. So the size of the flow is very heavy, because the document was almost 10,000 KB. So this increases the size of the flow. So with the help of file reference, we can actually reduce the size of the information inside a flow and increase its efficiency. So this is accomplished, as mentioned earlier, by using the file reference step. And with this, all the files are stored on the file system rather than within a flow. So this allows the users to pass in a file only when it is needed. Utilizing a load from file data step allows users the ability to create a file reference that can be used within a flow to reference a file on a local system. This can be used as an input for an element such as file download on a form component as well. When we speak about file reference entity, the file reference entities are an extension of file reference data and have some behavior of file references, but provide the file reference of a folder context. This means the file reference can exist within Decision Studio or Portal via a folder or a designer project. The folder context for file reference entities is provided by their entity reference ID and can be used with the add file references to folder step. So this becomes much handy when we are trying to extract or load files or save files into a specific folder inside decisions as well, so that the data is not going to take a lot of space, but still we have a file which can be easily downloadable. So this is about file reference and file reference entity. Now, when we speak about the differences, key differentiating factors between file data versus file reference, the most important thing is storing of files in decisions is only possible with the help of file data or documents, while file references gives the ability to store files outside of decisions as well. Second thing is the information on file data is stored on dbo.document table, while the file reference data is actually stored on file system or the server. So for example, when we are using the decision server, it is actually located in the C drive of the server that we are trying to store, and under C drive, it is present near the program files, decisions, and file storage. So file data or document is not the efficient way to store data because it consumes a lot of space and reduces the efficiency. So the best practice to use is file reference. So adding file references to the steps reduces the space and increases the efficiency of a flow or a project that we are referring to. So let me just navigate back into the studio and show you on a file reference how file references work. So as I was referring, so with the help of loading a file, so as you see, we have the ability to load all files, loading and deleting a file, or just a load from file data. So this step over here gives us the ability to load a document and then pass it as a file reference data. As you see, as soon as I connect this to the input step, now it asks for certain information, which is a file data. So let's keep it as a constant. Let me just download this document so that we can upload it right over here. And now once we connect this over here, this can be, as you see, the output of this step is a load from file data output, which is a file reference. So inside our document viewer, we can just go back here and select, instead of a file data, we can choose as a file reference. So let's save this. And now once we come back, this asks for the file reference. So let's go back and choose this particular one. As soon as we click on debug, now we would be able to see exactly same document that we have seen while we used the create data step and loaded it as a file data. So with help of load from file data, it actually reduces the space and increases the efficiency of the flow. So we can only access this particular file only when we need it. So as soon as we click on this particular step, we would be able to see input and output parameters. As you see, this is a file data that is being passed in, and the output would be a file reference. So this is all about how we handle files data as well as file reference and file reference entity. In addition to this, as mentioned earlier, we have document services where we can navigate into and fetch in a particular document from any particular path, or maybe add the document into a folder or a particular path, or delete the existing as well. So in case if we have any further queries, we can always refer to documentation.decisions.com and select the version that we are currently in and type in the query that we are looking for. So as you see over here, if we refer to file reference file, we get all the information related to file reference entities, file references, as well as other steps which are under file management. So this is for today's session. This is all about how we handle files in decisions. The key things is file data, file reference, and file reference entity, and how we can convert a file data into a file reference. Thank you for being on this session. Have a great day.